So thanks everyone for coming out. I see so many familiar faces, and I'm looking forward to meeting everybody that I don't know afterwards too, which is really great. This is really a community of creatives, which is fantastic. I mean, that is the goal of Creative Mornings, is to bring this group together. And I'm so excited to see so many makers, thinkers, builders, and doers in the audience right now. I'm just really kind of flattered and honored that everybody's here. So Julia's recollection of the invitation is a little bit different than my recollection of the invitation. When she sent me the note back in June asking me to speak here today, I was, of course, flattered, and then as I was reading through the notes, she shared that the theme for this month was failure. And I thought to myself, oh, that's why she's invited me. Okay, I've got to talk about that. Oops. There we go. I was going to say, hi, I'm Bill. So after I thought about it for a little bit, I mean, I gave her a fairly immediate response, probably because I'm not too smart about things like that. But, you know, I started to think about it, and, you know, I have to say that I'm pretty qualified to talk about the subject of failure. I have had more than my own fails. In fact, I kind of, in a particular light, think that most of my career has been about going from, you know, one failure to the next. Although I was a part of a groundbreaking group of scholars studying the connection between cognition and religion, I never finished my graduate degree. After leading the effort at Herman Miller for 7 years to build their first B2B commerce platform, they saw it fit to lay me off in 2003. Spout.com, which is a company I'll talk about in a little bit, although it was a really interesting critical success, it was a spectacular commercial failure. Hub Grand Rapids, my most recent kind of big project, although we gained a whole bunch of international support and raised a significant amount of local capital, it just couldn't get itself started. It couldn't get off the launch pad. In 2012, my marriage of 21 years was a spectacular failure on my part. And damn it, even if the reconstruction of my right ACL failed twice. Which is why you might see me limping from time to time. It's kind of one of those reminders that I'm getting old, and kind of a constant reminder for all of us about our human frailty, right? So, of course, I've had some successes, too, in my career. But Julia didn't ask me to speak at the Winners Theme Creative Mornings, did she? So here we are. You know, each of these failures have been painful to me. I'm human. You know, some of them are kind of like those mosquito bites that you can kind of easily brush off. And others feel a bit like an arrow to the heart. They're incredibly painful, and it lingers until you're able to kind of pull the thing out, if you're able to actually do that. And as I feel like I've been, for the most part, still recovering from my last failure, I've been doing an awful lot of thinking about it. I've been watching with great interest and listening to people as they have taken that first step of risk out and have failed or perhaps succeeded. And I've been listening a lot to kind of the greater community, both the creative community and the entrepreneurial community, about how we talk about failure, how we frame it, and how we define it. So one of the things that I did is, kind of embarrassingly, when asked to talk about failure, you go to the dictionary and you look up the word failure. It's one of the things people do, I guess. Not meeting a desirable or intended objective. So I looked up the much shorter fail, which means to not succeed. Okay. I even spent a whole bunch of time in Google Books Ngrams. Are you guys familiar with this thing? Where essentially you can look up words in all of the books that have been published over the last couple of hundred years that Google has cataloged and start to see trends and interconnections between those words. So I tried to look up the trends about how we talk about failure, over the course of the last 200 years. And I got to say that none of this was a satisfying exploration. And I think mostly it's because the topic is like really loaded to me. Now I want to frame all of this right now to say that this is all a work in progress. I'm still really trying to understand the feelings that I have about failure, and most particularly my own failures. So bear with me if you would, please, because some of what I want to share today may be incomplete, and some of the way that I word some things might be a little awkward. But ultimately, I want to get to this point that I really don't like the conversation that I hear our community talking about and having around failure. And I believe that we're really framing it incorrectly, or at the very best, we're telling an incomplete story. So I want to tell you two stories. Okay? And because this talk is really short, so I've got 20 minutes, I mean, who in their right mind would force people to do really short talks in front of an audience? TEDx Grand Rapids. I want to give you the general gist of each story to kind of frame things out as we talk. So this is the first one. Failure leads to success. So 2005, I run into a friend of mine at a coffee shop in Holland. He had just left Herman Miller under the same kind of circumstances that I did, not of his own volition. Dave was a senior executive VP of sales at Herman Miller. We had worked together on a number of projects, and he was kind of in this space where he was doing a lot of networking and kind of exploring on his own. And so we spent a bunch of time catching up kind of in an impromptu fashion over a cup of coffee, and then I didn't think anything of it. And then a week later, I ended up getting this call from Dave saying that, hey, throughout my networking, I bumped into a buddy of mine, and I found out that his son is pulling a group of people together and wants to create a company that explores the intersection between movies and social networking. And actually what Dave said was that he was trying to explore the connection between this like overlap or a mashup between Netflix and Friendster. But looking at everybody here, I didn't sure that everybody was familiar with what Friendster was. How many of you guys remember that? Well, more than I thought. And so a week after that call, I found myself in a basement in East Grand Rapids talking with a young team of first-time entrepreneurs. We talked about this emerging thing called social networking. In fact, I don't even think we called it social networking at the time. It was just this concept. What? People can get together and talk and do shit. Awesome. And so we talked about that. We talked about kind of this odd love that we all had for films. And they told me what they knew about the making of movies and about distribution and about the difficulties that they had and these conversations that they had actually just had at the Sundance Film Festival and this kind of epiphany moment that they had. That's how I met Rick DeVos, and that's how the beginning of this startup called Spout.com got going. So what was Spout? So Spout was a social networking platform essentially focused on helping people find movies and movies find audiences. You can call it an early attempt at creating a social recommendation system, kind of not unlike those types of things that you find on Netflix and Amazon today. Some people had to be the first ones to create that, and we were one of the first ones that were really thinking about this interaction between your social network, the people that you know, the people who know about movies just a little bit more than you, that you feel like you could create a trusting relationship with, and how they would recommend things to you, right? We all are very familiar with this stuff today. And we were pioneers in this space, even so much so that YouTube asked us to partner with them for the release of the first full-length feature film that they had on their platform. We created a whole marketing campaign around them, drove a bunch of traffic to our sites, and to this day they still use it as one of the kind of best-case scenario marketing plans that they've had around that space, which is awesome. We were nominated for a Webby Award in 2007 through Spout.com for Best in Podcasting. Our competitors, NPR, The Guardian UK, and Scientific American. Freaking awesome. We didn't win, but we were nominated. That's pretty cool. We spent a whole bunch of time sponsoring and talking at large film festivals. We spent time at places like the Telluride Film Festival, Tribeca, South by Southwest, Sundance. I actually, for 2 years, was Toronto International Film Festival's go-to person when they wanted to talk to somebody about trends, new trends in film distribution and marketing techniques. What did I know about that? And we had very active conversations with Netflix, Amazon, New York Times, and Blockbuster about potential acquisition deals. All of this stuff happening in Grand Rapids. But essentially there was a big problem. We couldn't figure out how to attract a large enough audience to the websites. And the people that we did attract, we couldn't figure out a way to really engage with them on a deep level to make it worth anybody's time to buy us. We couldn't figure out a way to make money, was essentially the deal, right? A lot of problems for a lot of startups. And by the time 2008 rolled around, we were already starting to have a lot of conversations about, well, what do we do? I mean, this is clearly a failure. We've tried a whole bunch of stuff. We just had this great partnership with YouTube that drove hundreds of thousands of people to our site, but we could barely keep any of them. We were doing something really wrong. And so we started to think about a pivot. We spent a whole bunch of time in the summer of 2008 saying, well, hey, we've been to film festivals before. Maybe we should bring a film festival to Grand Rapids and do something of a fair amount of note. Let's put a big investment into this thing. So we were easily distracted. And it was a really interesting time. And we spent a whole bunch of time and money contemplating the whole film festival thing. But by the end of 2008, we decided that we were going to have to shut the thing down. But we also decided that at the same time that there was a lot of learning that went into that whole project and a lot of resources, and that we were going to spend a fair amount of time actually dissecting everything that we did wrong and the stuff that we had an inkling that was going right. We spent the time to learn. We had the resources behind us to be able to do that as well. And then this kind of amazing thing happened in the midst of all of that. Rick asked a really simple question. He said, hey, what would the opposite of a film festival be? And a film festival is essentially, right, a bunch of very set venues, to show films. It's a highly curated kind of an event where you only have a specific kind of film that's shown or a specific kind of artist. The audience doesn't really participate much beyond watching the films. And so basically, I don't know if you can see where this is going, the opposite of that is a festival of sorts that any kind of artist can participate at any kind of venue where the audience is incredibly significant, right? And so out of that actually came a 10-slide keynote deck called An Art Prize. And that was the beginning of Art Prize. I like this quote, although I think it's worded a little clumsily. The right idea could start off life as the wrong idea. I was reading some back blog posts from Jason Fried, specifically talking about his interaction and some really cool stuff that Richard Saul Wurman said to him, and this quote just kind of popped up. So let me tell you another story. So failure leads to, I'm not exactly sure what the blank spot is. Maybe you guys can help me with this one. Is anybody familiar with this saying? It says, neurotics build castles in the sky, psychotics live in them, psychologists collect the rent. You guys heard that before? It's awesome, right? Let me tell you the story about Hub Grand Rapids. July 2011, I took the summer off to build a treehouse. My castle in the sky. And actually, that's not completely true. That summer had been a really eventful, kind of the whole year kind of up to that point had been really, really eventful. Was still buzzing off the success of the second Art Prize. That winter, I had been invited to the Rockefeller Foundation to do some work and help them think through this notion of the future of crowdsourced cities. April that year, I had found and hired my replacement for Art Prize. We were gearing up that June for the second installment of Momentum. Does anybody remember Momentum? couple people. It's the Aaron. It's the thing that preceded Joe. It's the thing that preceded 5x5 night. You guys remember 5x5 night, which is the thing that preceded Start Garden. And so we were getting kind of all geared up for that and excited about that. And then June, I was invited to, which was actually really significant for me. I was invited to go to this thing called Foo Camp. And actually I see a Bar Camp t-shirt over here. Are you guys familiar with Bar Camp at all? Just a couple of head shakes. So essentially Foo Camp is the beginning of all of that. It's an unconference. I had met Tim O'Reilly at the Rockefeller Foundation the year before, and he was impressed with the type of stuff that I was talking about with engaging communities and this crowdsourced nature, and invited me because of all of that to Foo Camp, which is basically this I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of the wiki of conferences. The idea is that you invite some really, really amazing people to a place. Everybody has the expectation that they're going to have to speak or they're going to have to present something, and as a group, you figure out the day that the event starts what the rest of the conference is going to look like, right? You organize everything on a Friday night, and then Saturday and Sunday are packed with these amazing people talking about stuff. So I got invited to this thing, which got me to think immediately, well, why am I invited to this thing? Why in the world would they invite me? What do I have to share? What do I know? And then I also started thinking, I went down this rabbit hole of thinking about, well, what do I have to, how am I going to represent myself? Am I going to be Bill, this guy from Art Prize, or am I just going to be Bill, the guy who's got like this really kind of eclectic background? And that moment of self-reflection actually led me to a really kind of series of unexpected places. One was that I go through personally these 7-year cycles of reinvention. And then it happened to be in June or so of 2011 that I was kind of at that spot of going through a 7-year cycle. And the other realization was that I had been a part of this really great creative community and entrepreneurial community, but anything that I had done entrepreneurially, I had a whole bunch of resources behind me when I was doing it. I wasn't the guy who was actually assuming all of the risk. I wasn't the guy who was really being the entrepreneur. So again, as one does when they come across such kind of personal realizations, is I gave the people at Foo Camp a call on a Friday and said, I can't come. It's like really, really awesome opportunity. I said, I can't come. Got to spend some time with my family and think about this stuff. And on Monday, I quit my job. And less than a week later, I started building a treehouse, which was awesome, by the way. It was glorious. For those of you who know me, know that I love tree houses. I mean, think about this. Tree house. House in the trees. They're amazing, man. What's not to love about these? But you know, it was interesting because it was more than just like building a house in the trees. It was this moment that I had that I forced myself in to have a bunch of self-reflection. When one is in the tree by themselves, you have a lot of time to think. And it also gave me a bunch of time because I had that summer off to talk with people. And that summer is where I met my future business partner, Steve Frizee. For those of you who know Steve, know that he was the founder and the initial leader for TEDx Grand Rapids. I was a part of that first project mostly as an advisor, so Steve and I kind of knew each other. But I knew that summer that Steve was looking for his next gig, and I obviously had kind of put myself in a position for looking for my next gig. So we sat down together over drinks, and the conversation kept coming back to the same theme. We kept talking about Art Prize and TEDx Grand Rapids, and not the events themselves, but this kind of overall awareness that there's this pattern here, right? That this creative community gets together, you guys, right? Get together and pull off these amazing projects or events, a lot of them on a volunteer basis, and then you disband, and then you get together for another one, then you repeat the process, and this thing just keeps going, right? This is rare and this is unique. And so as we were thinking about this, we were like, well, we've got to figure out a way to support this. And what we decided kind of then and there was that that was going to look like a place. That we wanted to create a place to house all of the people that were doing this work, and we wanted to also be the place where all of the knowledge for all of these projects would basically center. And we put some we had time on our hands, so we put this really kind of high-minded concept with very, very high ambitions about a co-working facility in mind, and all together. The high-mindedness was around, we wanted to help birth companies, products and projects. We wanted to exemplify a highly inclusive community. We wanted to facilitate community engagement, promote economic development, and lead social outcomes. Very high-minded indeed. The original idea was called GR Collective, but as we started to socialize this thing, it quickly became Hub Grand Rapids. International networking, an international network of independently owned and operated hubs committed to supporting social entrepreneurship. So long story short, we partnered with the MEDC, the City of Grand Rapids, and Grand Valley State University. We developed a really strong case study as to why Grand Rapids should host the next hub. And this is hosting the hub amongst this international network. The locations were places like London, Paris, Milan, Tel Aviv, New York, San Francisco, Grand Rapids, right? It all makes sense. And we gained support from the international community, which was amazing. And we got this license to create a hub in Grand Rapids. Actually, that international community convened in Vienna, and they talked about Grand Rapids as a place where great things could happen, and then they said yes. Right? That's freaking awesome. There are people in Vienna that were talking about things that could happen in Grand Rapids and the potential here. And then we raised a whole bunch of capital, too, or commitments for capital. We raised about $625,000 from both individual, corporate, and governmental investors. And I continue to be really thankful for all those people who believed in us. But we fell short. We fell short. We ran out of money. We fell short and we ran out of runway. We needed about $800,000. This is a big idea. We needed about $800,000 for the space, for the build-out of the space, and essentially to have enough capital to pay for staff for the entirety of a year, for that first year to have it move forward. And all of that development took Steve and I essentially that whole 2 years from 2011 to 2013 to build. Working with partners that had a very, very different type of a timeline, had a very much longer runway than we did. I personally burned through most of my retirement savings in that process. Although last night at the Design Briefs presentation, how many of you know Mary Brown? Mary Brown reminded me, and quite rightly, that burning through your retirement is a first world problem. Point well taken. But that leads me to this. This is my quote. Sometimes the wrong idea is really the right idea at the wrong time. Or maybe it has something to do with not enough time. And so what's the red thread? It's all about learning, right? I think we talk an awful lot about the learning to be gained from failure, which is amazing, right? There's a whole ton of potential when somebody fails to learn from all of those mistakes. I mean, we talk about hindsight being 20/20. But how's the learning supposed to happen? The first story is really a rare example. It's one of those where the team has enough resources and the time to develop an understanding of why they failed and how they were going to learn from it. But I think the second one is probably more true of more of the cases. I think it's much more common. Depending upon the size of the risk and the degree of the fail, most people aren't equipped to immediately learn from that experience. You know, I'm certainly one of those people. It's a rare person who can do that, just like it's the rare startup that ends up being that multi-million or billion-dollar startup that everybody hopes will get launched and that they aspire to. And I think this is the place, and this is maybe a subtle point, but I think this is the place where we get tripped up in our conversation about failure. My observation is that most of this conversation is really about encouraging people to take the initial risk. Because we all know or believe that taking of the initial risk is the thing that can lead to success or some sort of elusive innovation, and don't get me started about how we use the word innovation. But we all stand to gain from that success, right? As you guys start to, whatever your projects are or companies are, the whole community is going to gain from that. You're going to hire people and bring folk on. You're going to bring more capital into the community. It's all going to be good. But what about failure? I mean, seriously, how do we stand to gain from that? And don't get me wrong, I applaud our desire to continue to encourage people who are making the attempt. Because it takes a whole bunch of courage to take that risk, right? No matter what the size of it is. But what happens when they fall? Do we truly spend enough time helping them get up? And I don't mean asking them, putting our arms around them and asking them to go out for a drink, right? Because most of us in that situation could use far fewer drinks. But I think the place that we have to gain from that is in our collective learning. And if we're not in a position to learn from that quickly, that learning ends up dissipating or not happening at all, right? We end up losing out as a result of that. And ultimately, we end up learning or have the risk of learning nothing as a community. And the risk taker ends up learning that they just shouldn't take a risk again. And so I've been thinking about this an awful lot, and I want to make sure that we don't fall short as a community in how we deal with failure. Because the truth is we need to kind of both encourage the risk and make sure that we're completely following through on the support regardless of the outcome. So let me say that again. We need to both encourage the risk and follow through on the support regardless of the outcome. So what to do? I'm not exactly sure. You can agree with what I've had to say or disagree with it or think the point is too subtle to really make any difference or matter at all. But my goal today is really just to start a conversation about how we think about, talk about, and frame failure. And are we doing it? Are we doing it right? Are we thinking about the entirety or the totality of the experience and what we have to gain from it as a community? What do you think? Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. We have time for some Q&A. So I'll kick it off with a question, and that my head's kind of still spinning. There are a lot of subtle points that you just made. So let's say there is a failure of a company, for example, and they did what the company did, everything they could. It sounds like everything they could to be a success, but it just didn't work. Maybe they didn't get enough customers. What can the community do besides taking people out for drinks? Can you talk a little bit more about what you're envisioning, or maybe you don't know?
I don't know. Adam is here from the Toledo Museum of Art. We had a great conversation last night about that topic. We talk about an awful lot about supporting entrepreneurs from the investment perspective, right? Invest in them on the front end, on the encouraging side. We actually had a really interesting conversation about, well, why aren't we investing in the entrepreneur throughout the entire cycle? What about bringing those entrepreneurs into your organization as an entrepreneur in residence? Giving them a place, because, if you fail big, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Making sure that you have food and shelter, that you can take care of your family and stuff is like a big deal. You lose any net that you have, like your retirement savings, and you start to really worry about that. and you can't process, that next level up. So what if we help them take care of that? What if we bring these folk in, knowing that they can learn a lot, and help, innovation programs or entrepreneurial programs? That's another kind of investment that we can make. And these are people that have obviously learned a ton and have the right attitude. So I think that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, there are things like Failure Lab, right, where you can talk about, you as a solitary individual on the stage can talk about your failure, which is like starting to get to telling the story and sharing that, which I think is a weird thing, too. There's this mental model that I use an awful lot in working with teams, kind of figuring out where people are. There's this whole thing of going from dependence to independence to interdependence. You guys know this thing? I see a couple of head shakes, a lot of no, blank stares. So when you graduate from college, you're in a dependent spot, right? You think you know a lot, but you don't. Somebody has to tell you not only what your job is, but like how you have to do every single one of the tasks. You are dependent upon the person that you're working for and your team to tell you what to do. And your goal is essentially to gain enough skills to be able to do things independently, right? A project can come in. I know how to do things from top to bottom. Awesome. Bunch of people stop right there. The goal is really to get to the spot of interdependence. You've got a network of other individuals who have talents that go beyond yours, and you're interdependent. You're bringing those people together to work on a project and make the thing better than you could have done it by yourself. I mentioned that whole model because on the entrepreneurial side of things, when we talk about encouraging and trying to get things started, we talk an awful lot about the interdependent piece, right? We talk about how are we going to bring all these people in a community together to do that. But I don't think we do that quite on the lessons learned piece of things. We assume that people are smart enough and have are in a personal spot to be able to kind of recover from it all. But I think we have to consider, as a community, how we're still interdependent, that we still owe those people, that we just encourage to take the risk to help them learn, so to share all of that stuff. And I don't know what the platform is for that. Did you just say a flaming ball of shit? Okay. Well, I mean, if it looks like it's going to be a flaming ball of shit, then probably you should bail. I don't know. It depends. I mean, I think this is part of that whole ecosystem conversation. When things start to go down, it's about being interdependent as a community again. I think those who have had failed businesses, you don't hear a lot of those stories about why things failed because people are embarrassed by it. They've made bad decisions. Another part of the conversation with Adam and I yesterday, it's like, a lot of it doesn't have to do as much with the ideas as the execution, and people just kind of manage their risk really, really poorly. And I think as a community, again, we need to share in that. So that's not a good answer. Okay. Yeah.
For me, I feel like failure can happen too soon. I find that I'll have these ideas, but then almost the idea of failure keeps me from pursuing those ideas. Do you have any sort of advice on moving past from the idea stage into kind of that actualization stage? It sounds like you kind of started a few failures.
I mean, there are a lot of techniques and thinking and philosophies, I guess, about how you go through that cycle really fast. Everything from thinking about lean startups and whole notion of taking a fairly scientific approach to making the start. What's your hypothesis? What's the smallest thing that you can build that's going to have the greatest value right away, to just start to test the market, start to see if people are interested in the thing, start to socialize the thing. I don't know. What do you guys? What advice do you have for her on this? Well, and depending on some of these things too, I heard Mike. I'm going to get this wrong, but hopefully the idea comes out right. I heard Mike Morin from Stark Garden make some comment the other day about how he was talking with some friends about he goes to Guatemala a lot, but was it him? I think he was saying something that he only only knows like a few phrases of Spanish, and how he's always wanted to know Spanish, or always wanted to learn Spanish. And the guy he was talking with said, no. You want to know Spanish, you don't want to learn Spanish. Right? That's like this distinction. Part of this whole exploration and trying to start things and working on new projects is do you want to have the project, do you want to have the thing done, or do you really want to go through the whole process of doing it and making sure that it's successful or not? I mean, I think there are these kind of levels of internal realization about where what you have the capacity for, how much risk you want to take kind of all along the way. I'm full of subtle points today. You can do things like encourage them to go to things like design briefs. Get a community of designers around to help. I mean, I think so much of it from a design community's perspective, particularly if you're working at an agency, right, or if you're an independent, you see so many more startups. You've got so much more learning from observing other organizations going through the process that I think you can bring a lot of that knowledge to the startup, right? There's a lot of immediate knowledge about things that have succeeded or failed in the past, and you're able to make some connections that they're just way too close to the thing to be able to see in the first place. I think that's one way. The whole getting excited about working for a startup and investing way too much time and attention is more about you trying to block your time off and saying, how much money of the money that I make during the year do I really want to invest in that? And think about it as an investment. Think about it as a time investment all the way through. I think that was some of the conversation that John had last night at Design Briefs around a product that he's looking to develop too. It's how much are you willing to make, and then you start to think about your time as being a little bit more precious that way, and that you can't pick all of the winners. You just have to pick a couple. Yeah. Luck? Yeah, actually. Well, I mean, I think too often being at the right place at the right time with the right idea. I mean, that's luck. Things just kind of line up. I started a thread on the Grand Rapids Urbanist Salon on Facebook last week before last, asking questions about so I'm going to do a talk to a bunch of urban planners in a couple of weeks, and I wanted to find out from kind of this group if I didn't talk about it, what would what would my talk really be missing if this whatever this thing was, project, if I missed it somehow, right? So I got this really long list of projects and things, everything from the downtown market to Bike Coalition to TEDx and Art Prize to kind of a whole range of things. And one of the commenters, I want to say, I think it was Jeff Hill, made some comment that, you know, so much of this stuff has happened in the community because of the last 20 years or so of how Grand Rapids, West Michigan, thinks of itself, how the city planners put kind of the right parts and pieces in place, how the right stuff in the environment all came together. And so things like Art Prize didn't just come out of spouts, it also came out of this whole notion that community is important and that people's voices are really important. It also came out of, by the way, I think one of the reasons why Art Prize was successful was because the economy just sucked really bad that year, and people wanted a reason to get out of the house because I think people weren't going on vacations, they weren't seeing as many movies, and this was like a free event. We had actually really debated whether we were going to launch it in 2009 or 2010. We're like, 2010, things are going to be better, people want to go out, and we're like, nah, let's do it now. And I think that was one of the reasons why a whole bunch of people came out. That was sheer luck. It's not a good answer, is it? Yeah.